People are becoming increasingly radicalised, and young people most of all, and this is evidenced by the record referrals to the Prevent Anti-Terror Programme in Britain. I imagine something similar is happening in the United States. And this, honestly, is kind of to be expected, actually, isn't it? Because the establishment, the current status quo, everything it does is to maintain how things are now. And how things are now, if the collapse of the centre is anything to go by in the polling at the moment, is not satisfying anyone. We're getting the rise of what people perceive to be the radical right and reform. It's not, but don't worry. People are voting for it on those grounds anyway. And then on the radical left, we are getting the rise of the Greens, which is genuinely a radical left-wing movement. And the centre itself is just falling in on itself, because the argument from the centre is, and only can be, we want more of the same. We, the status quo, have been in charge for decades now. For in the case of young people, their entire lives, they've known nothing other than the way things are done now. And we want to continue this indefinitely forever, because this is the kind of politics in which we believe. And Keir Starmer being essentially the last man of this paradigm. To be honest with you, I think actually Nigel Farage is the last man of this paradigm. But he is at least outside of the general consensus, the very narrow band of consensus in the centre. Like Nigel Farage is, I've got my issues with him, obviously, but he is at least something of a renegade on some subjects. I mean, obviously Brexit being the primary one, but he's spoken about immigration and all these things, and he did do it before it was popular. Like, Nigel got in trouble in 2015 with the big poster with all the bloody migrants marching across Europe, and they all got on his case about it, but he was right, and he did stick his neck out there, so fair enough, Nige. And so you can see that the current status quo, the point of it is essentially to arrest change. As far as they're concerned, things being as they are now, that's how we want them to be, say the status quo. And so the Conservatives and Labour say, no, this is how the country should be. And everyone can't help but notice the country's fucking awful at the moment. Things are terrible. Now, we either should go one way or the other. Obviously, I think we should go to the right. The Greens think we should go to the left. But a decreasing number of people think we should just stay in this centre that satisfies no one, that solves nothing, that is the cause of the problems because it is trying to serve two masters. And this is what I think is behind this kind of generalised radicalisation. Because the thing about this, and we'll get into it in a second, is that this isn't any one particular ideology, apparently. The problem is that people are just not happy with the status quo. And the longer that Keir Starmer limps on in his dead premiership as the most unpopular Prime Minister that has ever existed, at the tail end of the Blairite paradigm, the least popular Prime Minister, with a huge majority that people just can't get rid of, until he does the dignified thing and admits that the experiment of Blairism has failed, and it has created a festering country that people are not happy with, then this is going to continue and things are going to get worse. Because while they are acting like a blockage in our political system, there is no avenue for improvement. They cannot bring themselves to do it, because it's going to have to be some kind of radical change, either towards the left or the right, to get us out of this rut. Anyway, as they say, a record number of referrals were made to the government's anti-terrorism prevent scheme in the year March 2025. Referrals to prevent, which can be made by schools, the police, local authorities, or the public, rose by more than a quarter to 8,778. 25% increase in a year. That's pretty serious. Like, people being like, I think this guy's a fucking lunatic. I think he's going to start doing something extreme. Well, that's a bit of a concern, isn't it? But look at this. In the majority of cases where a type of concern for the referral was noted, most specified, quote, no ideology identified or no ideology other susceptibility to radicalisation identified. Now, the BBC edited, as you can see, updated this article before I got hold of it. And I discovered this from Licorice here, who had posted this line, the majority of referrals which had no identified ideology at 56%. Now, let's assume that it's both categories that go at 56%. more than half of people who are considered to be extremists, like literal terrorists being referred to prevent, don't have an ideology. Radicalized, as Licorice puts it, into nothing in particular. That is fucking remarkable, isn't it? Because normally you expect a kind of pipeline of radicalization. People who believe or lean towards a certain kind of political view, left or right, one way or another, or Islam, whatever it is, through personal circumstances, find themselves going deeper and deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole until the entire system has been delegitimized and they feel themselves a desperate need for change, and therefore they end up doing something mental in line with a preordained, preset, a priori set of rules, regulations, or theological inspiration, whatever it is. But that's not what's happening here. No ideology identified. Just how can that be? How is it, this person's going to be extremist? Oh, for what? What are they going to be a terrorist for? Because terrorism, remember, is violence and terror used in service of a political aim. And say, what's the political aim? Don't know. Not such a shit country, maybe. Who knows? Like, no ideology informing what they're doing. That is insane, right? That is genuinely mad. Or, and that's one interpretation. Or the other interpretation is that whatever the ideology isn't either allowed to be identified or can't be seen by the powers that be. Because, of course, they specify, they talk about the review into prevent, and the Southport murderer Axel Rudakabana found the scheme prematurely closed its case on him despite there being, due to there being no evidence that he had a fixed ideology or motivation. Well, I mean, he did say that he wanted a white genocide, and he did say that he hated white people. That's an ideology and a motivation. And that's who he killed. So, is it that there isn't an ideology here? A formal ideology, maybe, like an ideology that itself has a manifesto. Obviously, there's no white genocide manifesto, or at least if there is, I'm not aware of it. But that doesn't mean he didn't have an ideology. That just means that the people running Prevent are not skilled in ideology, or skilled enough to understand what his ideology was. And again, closing the case on him, he was constantly getting in trouble, and bringing in knives and whatnot in school. Like, he was his dad to prevent him from going on a murder the week before. Like, the idea that there was no evidence that Rudakabana was going to be a maniac is not true. But if they couldn't say, well, he's not a communist or a fascist or an Islamist, therefore we don't know what he is. He's someone who hates white people. And so he murdered a bunch of them. The review found that counter-terrorism officers staffing the scheme had sufficient information to escalate Rudakabana's case to the next stage, which would have included enhanced monitoring. The review concluded that too much focus was placed on the absence of a distinct ideology, to the detriment of considering the perpetrator's susceptibility, grievance, and complex needs. So isn't that interesting? I think this is down to the fact that they're essentially being formally trained in like traditional ideologies. And if they can't identify one, then well, they're like, well, I mean, this is just not coming up on our radar. But there are ideologies that are forming on the internet that don't require manifestos, that are the product of, I guess, I don't know what you call it, echo chamber thinking, maybe. Someone having a constant reinforcement of information from one side or another, or whatever the subject is. And this is not just about politics either. There are communities that are basically like, I hate Games Workshop communities. I hate Trench Crusade communities. I hate Taylor Swift communities. I hate whatever it is. There are communities where the people in them are just kind of rabidly against that thing for whatever reason. And because they're constantly reinforced by the ability to have continual news, negative news about that thing, then they just have an irrational hatred of that thing. It doesn't have to just be political, but it can be political. And in the case of Rudakabana, I think it was definitely some sort of anti-white hatred. I mean, who knows, right? But it seems to have been underlying it some kind of anti-white hatred. But the point being, ideologies can be created through consumption and not just through the reading and adherence to a manifesto. We are in a much more complex world than the traditional understanding of ideology and extremism would allow us, would indicate. And it's something that we really have to think about. It's something we actually have to grapple with. And honestly, I mean, this is genuinely surprising how naive these people are at the way that these things work. Like, it's like they don't have any proper experience of dealing with this sort of stuff, which is obviously preposterous, but I don't know what else to tell you. Between the 29th of July last year, when the attack happened, Rudy Gabana, and the 31st of March, the Home Office and referrals said referrals to prevent rose by 34% to 6,350 compared to the same period the year before. I mean, they say, well, we don't think that's attributed to the Southport attack. I mean, who knows? maybe it is. But that's absolutely terrifying, isn't it? In 1 year, it's, we got a third more. And then the next year, another quarter on top of that. It's like, sorry, this is indicative of a system whose time has come, right? The end of a system, because it's completely failed, and it's causing radicalization in thousands of people. And this is, going up every year. This is something we really have to be able to understand is a product of politics. Right, this is a product of the system failing to work, and remember, this is like the most extreme wing of it. Like, if you look at like the death of the centre in politics and people shifting to either the left or the right, like that's another example of the failure of the status quo politics of this country, and people are just sick of labouring under it at this point. Like, the people in charge, the current crop of politicians, have to essentially admit that they have failed. Labour are going to lose hundreds of seats in the next election. The Conservatives are going to lose their 120 odd seats at the next election because the centre is over, right? Nobody wants this anymore. Like, only a third of the country actually wants the current status quo of Labour and the Conservatives. It's going to be probably the Lib Dems versus Reform or Green versus Reform in the next Parliament. This is a product of the failings of the prior system. And that's what I think we can infer from all of this. And what I think would actually be responsible is for the politicians to say, okay, look, we appreciate that we are yesterday's men. We have screwed this up. We have screwed the country up. We are creating extremists every day by our mere presence. And actually, our time in the sun is done. And what the dignified thing for us to do is to retire. Retire from politics. You guys have failed. You have not done the right thing. You've screwed up. You have not been the men for the hour. You have not understood what the problems are, and you need to go. So anyway, this is most affecting, apparently, young people. The latest data showed that children between 11 and 15 years old represented the largest proportion of referrals, 3,000 cases, or 36% of the total where the individual's age was known. How is it that teenagers, like 13-year-olds, say the average there, are the ones being radicalized? Now, they'll say, well, adolescents. It's like, okay, so you have a system that is creating radicalized, presumably young men, then surely it's the system. The system is not accounting for what it is that young men need. You can't say that these children are self-authoring individuals who have decided through careful, rational deliberation to just become evil. There's something in the system that's doing this. Individuals aged 16 and 17 made up the second highest share at 1,178 cases, and there were 345 referrals for children younger than 10. Outside of no ideology or other radicalization, the biggest note in referrals was extreme right-wing ideology. Well, I mean, that's always great. I mean, remember, there are 39,000 out of 43,000 people being tracked by MI5 are radical Islamists. So I guess things aren't getting worse for them. They're getting worse for the native population. There are 1,798 referrals citing extreme right-wing concerns, which was higher than those related to Islamist terrorism, which was 870. And so the point being, there's a cleavage opening up in British society, and one side is going to have to win and the other side is going to have to lose. You can't just maintain, you can't serve both masters forever, and that's what I think is driving this.